Hello everyone, wanted to give you a bit of an update on some newsworthy info that has happened since Sid and I recorded this episode on Saturday morning, the 9th of May. Plaid Cymru have announced they aim to form a minority government in Wales. Ken Skates has been announced as Welsh Labour's interim leader. In London, Labour have lost control of Lewisham Council for the first time in 55 years. Labour MP Catherine West has called on a cabinet minister to put forward a challenge to Keir Starmer before Monday, otherwise she'd be putting her name forward to do so. A growing number of MPs are calling for the Prime Minister to set out a timetable to resign. Keir Starmer has said he's not going anywhere. He intends to fight on to lead Labour into the next general election and beyond. And in a bit of a left field announcement, the Prime Minister has brought in two of Labour's old guard, former Prime Minister Gordon Brown as an advisor on global finance, and former deputy leader of the Labour Party, Harriet Harman, as his advisor on women and girls. So without further ado, here's the latest episode of the Political Dispatch. Election special, Plaid make history, the SNP hold firm, and reform storm the nations.
I've lost my seat here in Ceredigion-Pembroke, and I will be stepping down as leader of Welsh Labour.
But this campaign could only build on the work that has been done over a century of believing in our nation's future.
But it is becoming clear that the Scottish National Party is going to emerge as the largest party in this election campaign.
And two-party politics is not just dying, it is dead and it is buried.
And we saw it beginning last night. You see Labour down 35%, Reform up 39%.
I'm not going to walk away from this. That would plunge the country into chaos. But that doesn't mean we don't need to respond. It doesn't mean we don't need to rebuild.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Political Dispatch, the podcast where we explore the world's headlines and trace their roots through the past to make sense of the present. I'm Tom Spare.
And I'm Sid Kurapati. Today, we're without Lily, so it's just Tom and I, and we'll do our best to keep the show on the road.
This episode is focused on key results and analysis of the Senedd elections in Wales, the Scottish Parliamentary elections, and the local elections in England.
Absolutely, Tom. It's a bit of a whistle-stop tour this time, and the results are still coming in, but we've got a good overview of where we're at.
So let's start with Wales, my adopted country, where Sid, Lily and I met at Cardiff University during our masters.
We made a previous episode on Wales and how this was a change election, and the results have certainly lived up to their name. We knew that up to 2/3 of the membership elected was going to be new. There were new constituencies and an entirely new voting system.
And the Senedd elections have taken place 7 times in Wales since 1999. The results on Friday ensure that their 27-year run in power is well and truly over.
Absolutely, Tom. Just as a reminder, the Senedd elections take place to determine who governs in Wales. The Welsh Senedd has devolved powers over health, the economy. When I say the economy, it's the Welsh economy, education, housing, transport, the Welsh language, and some of the taxes.
Eluned Morgan became the first sitting First Minister in history to lose their seat while in office. Plaid Cymru, after 100 years as a party, have topped the polls for the first time, becoming the biggest party in Wales with 43 seats. Reform came second with 34 seats. Before the election, they had just one member of the Senedd. Their leader, Dan Thomas, was the first person to be announced as a winner, winning at a seat in Casnewid, Islin, which sort of covers Newport. Welsh Labour came a distant third. Their party have been decimated after dominating the political scene for over 100 years in the country. The party managing to secure just 9 seats in total, which is down from, I think, there were about 30 at the last election. The Green Party won 2 seats, a big moment for them, although the results don't necessarily reflect the wider enthusiasm for the party and the momentum that they've built up over the course of the last few months. The Conservatives won 7 seats, a long way from their second place position in 2021 election, and the Liberal Democrats won a solitary seat for their leader, Jane Dodds.
Yeah, that's a good nutshell of the results there, Tom. The big winners by far are Plaid Cymru, who will be looking to form a minority government for the first time in their history. Queen Ap Iwerth is likely to become the next First Minister of Wales. Of course, the Reform are exactly where they want to be, which is second place, second biggest party. They can be in the opposition, they can use this as a platform or to build towards next year's Welsh local elections, and will be positioning themselves for further gains come the 2029 general elections.
And the losers, so hands down, the Labour Party, they've lost their leader. They're down to 9 members of the Senedd. It was a bloodbath, basically. Nothing short of.
Absolutely, Tom. And the surprise is that Plaid have done really well in south of Wales and the valleys. The reason for that is that people were expecting Reform UK or Welsh Reform to do much better over there, especially in the former Welsh mining villages. But it does suggest that Reform has activated the disengaged people they don't traditionally vote for, and Plaid have won by getting lended votes from non-traditional Plaid voters. And the biggest challenge will be converting those lent votes into something that is more sustainable. So in short, this is not they need to ensure that this is not a one-hit wonder, that they consistently keep getting the votes in these locations that they've won in.
Yeah, exactly. And some critical moments, some stats and insights. So there was a record turnout of 51.65, the first time the 50% threshold had ever crossed in the Senedd elections, suggesting voters were energised, perhaps to remove Labour rather than drawn by enthusiasm for alternatives. I think also the key narrative became a sort of 2-horse race between Plaid and Reform, so it sort of activated both sides. So the new D'Hondt proportional voting system has enabled Reform to do very well. So under the old system, Reform's 34 seats probably would have largely been wasted. And actually, the good comparison is in Scotland. So Scotland has kept the voting system that Wales did have, which was separated between constituency votes and then regional votes. So Reform didn't do very well in specific parts of in the constituency vote, but they won in the regional vote. They won sort of their spread across Scotland. And the electoral reform that Labour backed arguably accelerated their own destruction. And actually, it wasn't Welsh Labour who were really up for this model. It was the Welsh MPs. So they seriously screwed over their Welsh colleagues.
The other key critical moments and stats and insights would be that Plaid Cymru strategically ruled out an independence referendum in their first term. And this is something which has been part of the core tenets of Plaid Cymru, of Welsh nationalism and Welsh independence. But they ruled this out, and it just broadened their appeal substantially, and it could have appealed to a lot more of the citizens living in the valleys and in the old mining towns where they got these lent votes. However, in this election, they haven't won a majority. They've got 43 seats, which means either they try and go for a minority government, as we've mentioned before, or they try and woo other local parties or smaller parties, definitely, to try and form a coalition government and breach that magic figure of 49 seats. And in this possible scenario, Greens and the Lib Dems clearly can make their foray into it. Maybe a couple of independents, if that's even a possibility.
Yeah, I mean the chance of a coalition is just not going to happen because the numbers aren't there. Because basically, Plaid took a lot of the Labour vote, so and Labour won't be doing a coalition with Plaid because they've got to do a lot of soul searching. But also, there was a potential at one time that the Greens could have won as much as 10 seats, and that would have really changed things because Greens are a pro-independence party too. There was sort of a lot of alignment on main policies. Interestingly, for the Conservatives, I think there could be some support in housing, for example, but Lib Dems have explicitly said they're not involved in any decision making if it involves independence. All elected members must take the oath of allegiance within days of the election, and the full Senedd must meet for the first time within 14 days. It was actually quite funny when I was watching the election results at work. We're all very keen on seeing what the results were. They were concluding remarks to sort of finish the day, and then they cut to the Senedd, and the first members were actually being sworn in. So it's like a real quick sort of turnaround. In that first meeting is where a new presiding officer will be appointed or elected, so the Welsh equivalent of the Speaker, because they're responsible for the running and order of the Senedd, of the 7th Senedd. So members have 28 days from the election to nominate a First Minister, who then appoints their cabinet. If no party wins an outright majority, which is what the current situation is, coalition negotiations could take time for a government to form, or it could be like a supply and demand arrangement, which is the most likely thing, where Plaid will run a minority government. And once the government's in place, committees are established to scrutinise its work, and the term begins in earnest. And the final formality is the official opening of the Senedd, marked by a visit from the King.
Fascinating, Tom. Just a quick question there. Like, so do all the is it necessary in the Senate for all the members, newly elected members, to elect a speaker, or to do the swearing in of the new members of the Senate? Is there a pro tem speaker, which is like a pro temporare? That's a Latin term, I think. Pro tem speaker is elected, who's usually the most experienced or the most elected member of the Senate. They kind of automatically becomes the pro tem speaker and then conducts those swearing-ins. Is that how the system works here?
Without the election of the presiding officer, nothing else can happen.
Mm.
So there isn't a temporary thing. It's like I think then I don't know whether the current presiding officer will then be there to stand up and say, this is the situation, we need to vote, because obviously someone needs to chair it. I'm not entirely sure. But unlike in the British parliamentary system, the Prime Minister isn't elected. They are the leader of the largest party, and they become Prime Minister based on appointment by the monarch. So when we started this podcast 2 years ago, it was the election of Labour, and Keir Starmer became the Prime Minister. Whereas in this case, it's much more like a European model. So
Yeah.
there can be drama, if it's tight like it is today, at the moment, there will be negotiations to do that. But usually the presiding officer is the least dramatic part, and then it will be the First Minister.
Can you give us a quick comparison of the voting system in Scotland and Wales?
Yeah, sure thing, Sid. So in Scotland, voters get 2 votes. The first is for a local constituency representative, elected in sort of traditional way, first past the post. Most votes win. The second vote is for a party which is used to elect regional members of the Scottish Parliament across 8 regions, with each region returning 7 members of the Scottish Parliament. It's the second vote where the Hunt comes in, allocating regional seats proportionally. But here's the key difference. The Hunt calculation in Scotland also takes into account how many constituency seats a party has already won in that region. So if a party has done well in the constituencies, their regional vote is divided by a higher number, giving smaller parties a better chance of picking up regional seats. It's a hybrid system, part first past the post, part proportional. Wales is using the Hunt system entirely. Previously, Wales had the 2-vote approach, which Scotland uses. So how does the Hunt system work? Well, each constituency selects 6 members of the Senedd, and you cast a single vote for a party rather than an individual candidate. Seats are then allocated in rounds. The party with the most votes wins the first seat. But here's the catch. Their vote total is then divided by 2 before the next round, making it harder for them to win again straight away. If they win a second seat, their total is divided by 3, and so on. This means the more seats a party wins, the less powerful their remaining votes become, which gives smaller parties a genuine chance of winning representation. In practice, it means almost no vote is wasted. If your party gets enough support across the constituency, they will win seats. And that threshold of getting votes is about 12% of the vote in total. Although the Hunt system does benefit smaller parties, the bigger parties are benefited in those first 3 seats. And then as you go down the list, it's more likely that smaller parties will pick up a seat if they get over that 12% threshold. And also the Scottish system, I think, is 129 members of the Scottish Parliament, whereas in the Senedd, it's expanded from 60 to 96. So that's the sort of difference there.
Thank you so much for that, Tom. For all our listeners, I think that's a brilliant way to kind of understand the differences. And it's necessary to understand the system when you're voting in whichever election that you're voting in, because that really, considering the shift in the system, every vote counts now more than ever. And that's what makes it really important. It's great that Wales breached the 50% mark. It would be great if the following Senedd elections and the ones after that, we see higher and higher voting and participation from the public.
I think it's likely that the turnout will go up, because I was a bit concerned it would go down because people are confused about the system. But I think now they see the results, they're probably less likely to vote tactically next time and actually go with the party that they want to see elected. The system will likely change again, because currently in Wales there are 16 super constituencies, which is a combination of the 32 parliamentary constituencies from Westminster. So each constituency has 6 members of the Senedd. But these constituencies are huge. Like one constituency, which I was talking to my colleague about, which includes the Brecon Beacons and Brecon, that extends from the English border all the way down to the Swansea coastline. So Brecon voters now currently have a coastline, which is the first time in their history.
When I saw the map, I kind of kept thinking, what exactly is happening here? Because I found it a bit difficult to, as 16 super constituencies, and then you have 96 members, each with a certain specific set of members. With the new voting system, the representational side of things, I was like, okay, if me as a, let alone the map side of things, which is fairly complicated as is, which they're trying to basically balance out population percentages, right? Which is why the very random looking electoral map. But even if I've come from a political communications background as a very keen observer of politics around the world, if I'm finding it complicated, I'm sure, keeping aside the fact that I'm not from this country, it leaves me with a lot of questions. And it really made me think, if the Welsh Labour had done a campaign just to explain the system, they would have probably done a lot more better in terms of results. If they had simplified the system and just kind of really promoted it, instead of just saying that, elections are coming, you should register and vote, if they had focused more on the idea of this is how the change is happening, this is how things will happen, and done a really video-based campaign. Nothing really popped up on my social media algorithms, even though I was kind of wired into the whole thing. So it seemed a bit odd to me. That's my observation of it all. It's a good point to segue into Scotland, I would say, and try and, give a brief insight into what the results were. So, Tom, why don't you go ahead?
Yeah, cool, thanks. So as a reminder, the Scottish parliamentary elections have taken place to determine who governs Scotland. The Scottish Parliament has devolved powers, and they have more devolved powers than the Welsh Senedd. So they have control over agriculture, forestry and fisheries, some benefits, consumer advocacy and advice, economic development, education and training, elections to the Scottish Parliament and local government, which is similar powers to Wales, energy in some aspects, environment, equality legislation in some aspects, fire services, freedom of information, health and social services, housing, justice and policing, which is something that Wales definitely doesn't have, and one of the big elements. Local government, planning, sports and the arts, some aspects of taxation, tourism, and also some aspects of transport. The Scottish Nationalist Party have led the government in Scotland since 2007, with majority rule in 2011, 2016, and minority/coalition government since 2021.
That's right. The SNP won their fifth parliamentary election on the bounce, winning 58 seats. Labour and Reform have come a joint second with 17 seats respectively, while the Greens are third on 15 seats, Conservatives or the Tories fourth on 12, and the Lib Dems with 10.
And after a bumpy few years beset by scandal, resignation and infighting, the SNP have retained power and will pass 20 years in power next year. They remain the dominant party of Scotland. In many ways, like the Scottish Premier League, they are Celtic, always winning everything. Although I guess where Celtic are at the moment, neck and neck with Hearts, it's not the best analogy. I think that's the first sporting metaphor we've had in the political dispatch.
That's right. I mean, in 2 years, the first sporting, we might have had one or two in the American election one, where we might have used stuff like touchdown and finish, photo finish. But I prefer this analogy more, though, to be honest. Adding on to what Tom said, the reform has benefited from the Scottish voting system. They didn't pick up any constituency members of the Scottish Parliament, but they made gain on the regional list. Hence, 17 members. Also, the Greens have made big gains, as we mentioned earlier, 15 seats, and may well become key power brokers in this current scenario.
Scottish Labour are now in a challenging situation. Just a couple of years ago, analyse was set to become the first minister of Scotland after lots of controversy in the SNP. Now his party has the same number of seats as Reform.
So after the winners and the losers that we've covered so far, here are some of the surprises in the Scottish elections. Labour won the Scottish parliamentary seat of Na Eilean Anlar, taking off the SNP for the first time in 19 years. And then they also won the Edinburgh South. On the other hand, Lib Dems, Caithness, Sutherland and Ross, Strathkelvin and Bearsden and North Edinburgh were won by Lib Dems, as I mentioned. The SNP gained Shetland Islands and Eastwood, and the Greens gained Glasgow Southside and Edinburgh Central. In that sense, Edinburgh kind of divided its vote amongst the three parties, right? They kind of made sure that they're represented across the board.
So the Conservatives crashed out from 31 just to 12 MSPs, their worst ever Holyrood result, almost entirely consumed by Reform eating their vote on the right. Centre-right Scotland is now effectively split between the two parties. The Cabinet Secretary Angus Robertson lost his seat in Edinburgh Central to Greens' Lorna Slater, one of the most senior SNP figures to lose their seat to a party that barely contested constituencies before 2026. Reform's rise paradoxically strengthened the independence cause by fragmenting the Unionist vote against Conservatives, Labour, and it made it easier for the SNP and the Greens combined to hold a comfortable pro-independence majority in Holyrood, even as the SNP's own vote share fell. And just to note, Holyrood is the name of where the Scottish Parliament is.
The SNP and the Greens combined hold around 73 seats now, which is well above the 65-seat majority threshold, meaning a pro-independence minority government backed by the Greens on confidence in supply is the most arithmetically stable outcome. And a second independence referendum by 2028 is a fairly likely possibility at this point in time. Additionally, Scottish Labour's position is now structurally very precarious and is kind of tied with the Reform Party that didn't exist in the Holyrood 5 years ago, and having suffered its worst ever Scottish Parliament results just 2 years after winning a landslide across the UK in 2024. It's a stark contradiction, and it's also reflective of how volatile the internal politics of UK have kind of become over the last few years.
Yeah, 100%. And Scotland were the Scottish Labour Party were building momentum, because in the 2015 general election, they were completely decimated. They lost loads of MPs. And then the 2024 general election, they were gaining a bit more momentum. They got loads of their MPs back. But then, this election has fragmented things again. And I suppose that's the challenge with devolution elections, is that now Labour have lost Wales for the first time. They're opened up then to a lot more vulnerability, both in Wales and Scotland. So Labour Party have got a lot of battles on a lot of fronts, basically driven a lot by nationalism, and that's nationalism both on the left and the right. And I think when a lot of people think of, say, like English nationalism, they will think of reform, or they'll think of more extreme versions of reform, so the BNP or other more extreme and racist parties than that. But also, I don't think people necessarily consider left-wing nationalism, which is where the Scottish Nationalist Party and Plaid Cymru and then to an extent Greens as well. They're nationalists. In the Greens in Wales, nationalists. So yeah, really interesting dynamic. Scotland moves faster than Wales after polling day, so the Scottish Parliament must meet within 7 days of the election, with business expected to resume in next week, and the first full proceedings likely on Thursday, the 14th of May. Before anything else can happen, every MSP must take an oath or an affirmation, a moment that reflects Scotland's diversity, with previous sessions seeing oaths delivered in Gaelic, in Urdu, in Zimbabwe, Shona, alongside English. Only then can the presiding officer and deputies be elected, clearing the way for the nomination of a First Minister, and that process must be completed within 28 days, though in practice it tends to happen much faster. It took just 12 days after the 2021 election. Any MSP can stand for First Minister, not just the leader of the largest party. Their convention has so far followed that precedent. If more than one name is put forward, a vote shall take place once the First Minister is confirmed by the monarch, so King Charles. Ministerial appointments follow quickly, and the Scottish government takes shape. As in Wales, if no party wins an outright majority, which remains a possibility, a formal coalition or looser issue-by-issue agreement with other parties will be needed to govern effectively.
It's also worth noting that with the elections of Stephen Flynn and Stephen Gethin, both currently MPs in the British Parliament, they will have to step down as MPs, because a new law was passed in the previous Scottish Parliament that you can't double job, i.e. hold elected posts in both the Scottish Parliament and the British Parliament. There will need to be by-elections in their constituencies of Aberdeen South and Arbroath and Broughty Ferry, respectively.
English local elections. So we've had the elections in Wales and Scotland, which are devolved national elections for Wales and Scotland. Now on to the local elections, the winners and losers across England. And this scale is much bigger. Okay, so the English local election results paint a dramatic picture of a political landscape in flux. So Reform UK was the night's biggest winner, gaining 14 councils and 1,442 councillors, a result that represents almost entirely new presence in local government. The Greens also had a strong night, winning 4 councils they didn't hold before and adding 374 councillors to reach 515 in total. Labour suffered the heaviest losses of any party, losing 35 councils to finish with just 28 and shedding 1,406 councillors, leaving them with just 997. Although they do have councillors in other places, it's worth reminding that this isn't all councillors across England. There are many, many more thousands than that, and they're elected on a sort of circular basis. So we'll have more local elections in the coming years. The Conservatives also had a difficult night, losing 6 councils to finish with 9 and losing 557 councillors to leave them with 773 overall in the areas that were being elected. The Liberal Democrats were the one established party to make really big gains, adding 1 council to reach 15 and gaining 151 councillors to reach 850. 34.
Those are some staggering numbers there, Tom, with a lot of gains and losses for Reform and Labour, respectively. Just a quick reminder to all who are listening that the situation is still evolving. So the final results are still adding up as we speak at this point in time. And perhaps the most telling figure of the night is the number of councils with no overall control. That is 61 in total, up by 22. It points to a fragmented political landscape at the local level in which no single party is dominant. Deals will need to be done, and the business of local government will be harder to transact now more than any point in recent memory.
So to move specifically to London, London delivered a night of significant upheaval, with Labour losing control of several boroughs it held for years, and Greens emerging as the most as the biggest beneficiaries. So traditionally, Labour has always dominated in London since their founding. The mayor of London, which is elected separately on a different timeline, is Sadiq Khan, or Sir Sadiq Khan. The standout result was in Hackney, where Greens won 42 of the 57 seats, a swing of 38 seats. And I believe they won the mayorship as well, actually, at Hackney, which I didn't know was a thing. Taking control of the council from Labour in one of the most striking borough results of the night. The Greens also took Waltham Forest from Labour and gained strongly in Haringey, Islington, Greenwich, Camden and Southwark, cementing their status as a serious force in inner London politics. Worth noting that Zach Polanski, who is the leader of the Greens, has a position at the London Assembly. So I think it was always going to be a pretty good chance of them doing well. Labour held on in a number of boroughs, including Ealing, Hounslow, Greenwich, Hammersmith and Fulham, and Redbridge, often with significantly reduced majorities, pointing to a party under sustained pressure even when it survived. It lost control in Barnet, Brent, Enfield, Haringey, Newham, Southwark and Wandsworth, with several of those falling into no overall control rather than to a single opposing party. I was feeling like I was reading some sort of tube map, although I know that they're not all tube locations, but that was quite fun.
Well, you saw it and you said it.
Yes,
it,
exactly.
And it's sorted.
Yeah, it's sorted, but emphasize the sorted. And also, mind the gap and etc. Yeah,
absolutely. And Labour will have to mind this gap of 1,400 plus council seats that they have lost because Reform has made its presence felt in outer London, most dramatically in Havering, where it won 35 of 55 seats to take outright control of the council. It also made gains in Barking and Dagenham, Bexley, Hounslow, which I'm a bit surprised, and in Bromley, though its footprint remains concentrated in outer east and south London rather than in the inner city of it all. The Tories had a mixed night, holding on to Bexley, Bromley, Harrow, Hillingdon, Kensington and Chelsea, while gaining Westminster from Labour, which is quite symbolic, I might add, but losing ground elsewhere. The Lib Dems continue to dominate in their traditional strongholds, holding on to Kingston and Richmond, making significant gains in Sutton, where they now hold 51 of the 55 seats. Wow, that's a pretty good gain. They really silently kind of crept up, haven't they?
Yeah. I mean, the Lib Dems always do well, like locally. They have such good campaigners, and they really always punch above their weight. When they really like set their minds to it, they can get pretty impressive wins.
Clearly, we can see that. And in the mayoral contests, Labour held Newham, though Farhad Hassan's win came against the backdrop of Labour's collapse council majority there. While the Greens took Hackney and Lewisham, Jason Perry held Croydon for the Conservatives, and Lutfur Rahman was re-elected in Tower Hamlets for his Aspire party, which I do need to read up more on, to be very honest.
And across the rest of England, Reform made significant gains in the north of England, in Gateshead, in Sunderland, which is where the first sort of vote came through about voting leave during the Brexit referendum, in Kildare, in St Helens, Wakefield, Barnsley, and Newcastle under Lyme, not to be confused with Newcastle on Tyne. In the Midlands, Walsall and Sandwell, and in the south, Wavering and Thurrock.
Just to add on to the Sunderland point that you were making, Reform gained 46 out of the 75 declared seats so far, and it's supposed to be one of Labour's most symbolic northern cities, which is why when Brexit happened, it was such a earth-shattering kind of a moment in British politics that if Sunderland's voted leave, what's really going to happen in the rest of the Labour strongholds? And in the local elections, Reform virtually swept away in a single light, and a stark illustration of how deep the Red Wall collapse now runs.
Reform took Essex County Council, home to the only way is Essex, the home county of Conservative leader Kemi Badenoch, a personal humiliation that raises some questions potentially about the ability to prevent Reform consuming Conservative votes ahead of the general election in 2029. It's also worth noting that Nigel Farage's seat is also in Essex as well. Reform's appeal was not uniform. It was weakest in inner London, where the Greens were the main beneficiary of Labour's collapse, and strongest in post-industrial northern towns and eastern counties. This geographic split suggests two very different anti-Labour coalitions are forming simultaneously.
Quickly moving on to the Lib Dems, they've had a quiet advance, which has continued gaining 151 councillors and consolidating Southern England's the commuter belt's positioning themselves as the effective opposition across a swathe of territory from Surrey to Somerset, where the Tories have structurally collapsed or have weakened. Let's put it that way. That's the results in Wales, Scotland, and in the local elections across England.
Yes, I suppose what we should do before we finish is just look at some of the consequences of this. In Wales, Plaid Cymru will be, the largest party now, and they're going to look to form a minority government. What happens next with that is really based on the support that they can get elsewhere from different parties, supply and demand. It's going to be quite a messy period. It'll be interesting to see what partnerships are built up there. In Scotland, it'll be interesting to see if the SNP again try to run a minority government or try and get the support of Greens. And obviously there's a larger Green presence. And then in England in particular, there's now a lot of pressure on the Prime Minister, on Keir Starmer, because the results haven't gone very well in Wales. They've not gone very well in Scotland. They've definitely not gone very well in England either. And the thing is, Keir Starmer doesn't have a natural successor, which makes his position quite interesting, because it's going to take a few Labour MPs to stick their head above the parapet and say, time to go, sir. But also the people that are sort of seen as prime ministerial material. Angela Rayner had to resign because of housing controversy. Wes Streeting has a majority of about 900 in his constituency, so he's not in a very safe seat anymore. My bet is on Shabana Mahmood, who is the Home Secretary, who's on the right of the party. That's my bet of who will become the next Prime Minister. Sid is shaking his head.
Yeah, I mean, if the Labour is really serious about tackling the rising far-right vote and sentiments for the reform, it's not to add further far-right or center, right of centre members to rise up in the Labour. It's about going back to the core values of Labour and emphasizing on what they really stand and just amplify that. This is a problem of poor communication. And this is something which people have been saying right from the beginning when Keir Starmer kind of took oath 2 years ago in July 2024. Despite such a staggering mandate that they received, their comms have been really poor. And I don't know how they've not really worked on rectifying that. I had an interesting question for you, though, Tom. I know that Starmer's position right now is a bit weakened considering the results. But considering that the Tories have done far more poorly than the Labour in some aspects, I would say. And Kenny Badenoch's constituency is further weakened because, you have another party kind of coming up over there, which is, I think, Reform. Does that kind of give him a certain edge to continue being in that position? Would the, the up and coming leaders of Labour be like, let Starmer fail completely and then we'll come in, rather than try and hold on to a sinking ship, which the final three leaders of the Tories kind of did, right? Like Liz Truss did that. Theresa May kind of did that to a certain extent, and then Rishi Sunak kind of tried to do that as well. What do you think about that?
I think Kemi Badenoch's performances have been improving at Prime Minister's questions. I think she's getting a stronger hold of her party, and it's always going to be a difficult rebuilding job. I think one of the best things that happened to her leadership was Robert Jenrick leaving and joining Reform, because her sort of biggest critic had left the party and is now in the Reform camp, which was the big challenge for Theresa May when she was Prime Minister, that she had to bring in Boris Johnson, as Foreign Secretary, and he was making a name for himself. And then he became a very key opponent of hers. And there was always someone waiting in the wings. I don't think there's anyone clearly waiting in the wings for Kemi. So I think her position is relatively safe. And she'll make the argument that it's still a rebuilding job. And, we went from a pretty dire situation and we've still got to rebuild. In terms of Keir Starmer's position, there isn't a natural successor. If rumours are to be true, there are people willing to step aside to resign to allow Andy Burnham into the picture. And if that happens, then everything changes. Andy Burnham is the mayor of Manchester. He is the most popular Labour politician, and he's probably one of the most popular politicians in the UK overall. But that is a very low bar. Most British politicians are not very popular at all. You're saying it like, 20% approval or 30% approval or something, it's not a huge amount. That changes the arithmetic. But there's a lot of processes that have got to happen before then. And I think what a lot of people forget is the majority, the big majority that Labour hold means that a lot of the Labour MPs owe Keir Starmer their political position. There's such a new intake of MPs in Parliament that he has those loyalists around them, because without him, they are nothing.
Yeah.
And that's the rub, really, isn't it?
I think you've hit the nail on the head with that point, Tom. And it's probably a universal truth that way. When you have a leader a party leader who wins very decisively and brings in a ton of new faces, and they all win because of his leadership, in a sense, at least from an optics perspective, it emits a certain level of loyalty within the party, which is unshakable despite controversial decisions. And you see that a lot in American politics. You see that a lot in Indian politics, probably in European politics as well to a certain extent. But large democracies, large autocracies kind of manifest this very well. In a sense, that's probably a good place to kind of wind down this episode and leave a good question in people's minds as to what's going to happen in 2029. Is Labour really going to go and do some soul searching and figure out course correct in the right direction? Not in the right direction in courts, but like in the direction in which they need to be in? Or are they going to steadily go in the path of self-destruction despite having received the largest mandate in recent history?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think a good question to end on, and I would leave on these thoughts too, is that when Labour won the general election in 2024, I think a lot of people were struck by nostalgia. They remembered the good old days of the 1997 victory, and that carried a lot of people along with them. But Starmer and co were enabled and supported by a lot of the new Labour gang, including Peter Mandelson, although his role as that evolved, what role did he play? I think the biggest fan of Peter Mandelson is Peter Mandelson, and I doubt his significance in the New Labour movement. And I wonder how much of Labour's success was really down to him. And I think there's a lot more talented people in that pool of politicians in that era. And for Keir Starmer to make the comments that he's made are interesting, given Peter Manderson's record in government, is what I'm saying. So we'll see what happens there. But also Labour's victory in 2024 was broad but shallow. And this is the problem, that a lot of their MPs have small majorities and could disappear come the 2029 election, or if it came earlier than that. So that's our final thoughts on the episode today. We hope you enjoyed the episode. Let us know in the comments, give us a rating, share with your friends, family, fellow classmates and colleagues. This has been a Be The Change Media Network production. I'm Tom Spare.
And I'm Sid Kurapati. You've been listening to the Political Dispatch.